A very warm welcome and a very good evening to everyone who has joined and made time to join us today. My name is Bhavna Isar and I am the founder of Caregiver Sathi, and it is my immense pleasure to welcome our guest speaker today, Dr. Kersi Chawra, for our webinar series on compassionate caring. And the topic today is very interesting. The topic is psychiatric and psychosocial aspects to caregiving. I would like to take a little time to talk to you about Caregiver Sathi and then have this conversation. A brief introduction to Caregiver Sathi for some of you who are new to the organization. We are trying to create an ecosystem of well-being and healing for the family caregiver. Family caregivers of those navigating terminal illness, chronic conditions, or any life-limiting conditions have their unique challenges. We support them through their caregiving journeys and beyond through the ecosystem that we are trying to create. We believe and we would like to create an environment of well-being by empowering the caregiver. We also believe that both the caregiver and the care receiver have a right to lead full lives, and that can be done provided we can provide for the needs that the caregivers may have. How do we do this? We use technology-enabled systems to create human connection. We do awareness programs that are both online and offline, like this one. We have a helpline, we have healing circles, we do communication of various concepts, ideas, and through our social media communication. We provide access to relevant information, both one-on-one, as well as through various platforms. And finally, through our tech-enabled support system, which is both our website as well as our app. What we have done so far in a brief journey of about 15, 16 months, we have built a few resources that are available for everybody, which is our platform, our app, website. We do training programs and awareness sessions that are both online and offline. We have an app which is to support caregivers so that caregivers can organize themselves and create the time that they really need to look after themselves as much as they look after their loved ones. We have a community. We have something called caregiver stories. We believe caregivers are the gentle warriors who are invisible, but it is very important that their stories be heard. So we run a video series called Gentle Warriors, and I would encourage all of you to see some of the stories of these gentle warriors on our YouTube channel. And if you know of gentle warriors, then please do suggest them, encourage them to tell their stories, and we would like to publish their stories through our series. We have a second series, which is called Compassionate Caring. Compassionate Caring is a series from experts, which is also video series as well as this webinar. So the webinars, which are advice or input or concepts from experts, are featured through both the videos as well as webinars. We have a caregiver coaching program. Individuals can sign up for one-on-one coaching so that they can be supported during their caregiving journeys. Provide family counseling, and finally, volunteer-based respite care, which is currently on hold given the current pandemic circumstances, but we do have a volunteer base that can help support caregivers. How can you get involved? You can get involved in many ways: by joining the healing circles and support groups, by sharing caregiver stories and encouraging people to share their caregiver stories, by spreading the word in person and on social media, by volunteering, by donating and helping us raise funds. We are a not-for-profit organization. By suggesting individuals to join our internship programs. We like youth to participate in this program because we believe that citizens of the future need to recognize the significance of caregivers and caregiving. And finally, help us with referrals for partners, hospitals, and organizations. We have a framework in which we look at 7 elements of well-being across physiological, psychological, financial, legal, spiritual, social, life and work purpose, and creative expression. We believe that stress is caused when there is an imbalance in the well-being, and that unaddressed chronic stress can lead to mental health issues. Building resilience is critical, and this can be done through practices of mind, body, and soul. And this is what we would like to work with. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kairsey Chawra, and a brief introduction to him. Dr. Kairsey Chawra is an accomplished senior psychiatrist concerned with the diagnosis and treatment and prevention of mental and emotional health problems. Dr. Kairsey Chawra was a past president of the Bombay Psychiatry Society and consultant at PD Hinduja National and Hinduja Healthcare and the Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospitals. He has been a chairperson of the task force of the Indian Psychiatric Society, IPS, dealing with school psychiatry and counseling. He has been a part of the first panel of the Maharashtra government that laid down concessions for learning disabilities in Mumbai, on the advisory board of the mental health panel of Project Mumbai. He is currently on the mental health advisory committee to Project Mumbai, a private sector state government initiative that works towards solving issues in the MMR. And he is a chairperson of the IPS task force dealing with college psychiatry. Welcome, Dr. Kairsey.
Thank you, Bhavana.
It's a delight to have you support Caregiver Sathi, caregivers, and finally have you in this webinar.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much.
You know, the last time that I spoke to you about the topic, it got me really thinking that you insisted on the difference between psychiatric and the psychosocial aspects of caregiving. So over to you, we would like to hear your perspective.
Okay. So, you know, everybody is aware of the fact that supposing you have to look after somebody who's very close to you for a long time period, because here I'm basically going to be talking about family caregivers and not professional ones. If you're looking at people who you're looking after, it gets at you over a period of time. If you have somebody you love, somebody you're caring for, and you're seeing the person either having a mental disorder or having a physical issue, and because of that, the person becomes absolutely dependent on you. The person becomes a caricature of the robust individual that maybe you were used to seeing. It can really affect you. And all of us are aware of the fact that we feel sad, we feel down, we feel upset, and so on and so forth. All of us are aware of the fact that at times we can't sleep and we feel upset. We wonder why this is happening. What a lot of us are not aware about is that if we ourselves have this genetic tendency towards a particular psychiatric illness, and we are looking at now 1/5 of the population having some kind of psychiatric illness. So if I already have a tendency towards a particular psychiatric illness, and I'm dealing with a person who's having a major issue, I'm a caregiver, I'm looking after that person, and it's a chronic situation, the person is having a problem since a long time, and I'm seeing him or her waste away in front of me, him or her in agony, him or her not recognizing me, him or her having maybe a psychiatric problem herself, it's going to affect me. And if I have this genetic tendency, and if the situation is primed for myself, I might not only have the usual sadness and, oh my God, why is this happening kind of thing, but I might land up having a psychiatric illness myself. And that is something that sometimes we don't really pay attention to. We are so involved with this giving thing. We are so involved with wanting to do stuff, which we must. I mean, it is stupid for us to be in a family if we don't look after our family. It is stupid for us to be in a society if we do not look after people who have nobody who might be looking after them. And if I'm a neighbor and I'm looking after a neighbor who's withering away in front of me, either mentally or psychiatrically, then it would be nice if I could help. But the point is, sometimes we forget that we are also vulnerable. Sometimes we forget that the caregiver also needs to be helped, which is why organizations such as yours play such an important role, which is why it is important for us at times not to be martyrs. You know, sometimes we get into this, how can I ask for help from others? How can I just let this person be? Why should I put him into a home? And it's very difficult. It's not easy. But at times we have to do that for our own sanity, which is why when you came up with this whole thing of psychosocial, I said there has to be a psychiatric component as well. We have to get used to the idea that we are not supermen, we are not superwoman. We have to get used to the idea that we are also vulnerable. We have to get used to the idea that at times, for our own safety, for our own mental well-being, for our own physical well-being, for maybe the well-being of our family, we need to get into a situation where we say this far and no further for us. And it's terrible. While we were talking about this, I think you might remember, I mean, my parents lived till they were 86 and 85 and so on. They were both fairly robust individuals. When my dad, he had a fracture about 9 months before a fracture of the leg about 9 months before he expired. And at that age, when you're in the 87, it's very difficult to recover. He landed up also having a little bit of dementia. And we had kept him at home. And I'm a doctor. I had best advice going. We had kept up almost like a hospital at home. We had 24-hour care and so on. But when I was watching him, and while he was deteriorating, 3 times we put him into a hospital, brought him back, put him into a hospital, brought him back. Finally, my mom said, no more. We can't go on and on like this. And I'm clinically detached and I know everything. I mean, I know a lot of stuff in psychiatry and I know what I'm going to feel and I know how I'm going to cope. And I was cracking up. I was feeling terribly guilty. I was getting into this, am I doing enough? I was feeling angry with the rest of the family for maybe not having given the kind of time that I would have liked for them to have given. I was getting upset at the fact that I had to do my own work. We still have to continue with our profession.
Lives.
And with our lives. And that is, Bhavna, what really got me at that time, this was about 8 or 10 years ago, thinking about how easy it is for all of us to mouth these little platitudes about, look after family and you're such a lovely person. Everybody call me a lovely person. But how difficult it is for that lovely person to cope when a wonderful person in your life, your parent, who you adore, is having such problems. We are all born with this idea that nothing should happen to our parents. Our parents should be strong. We were the kids. We are not supposed to have weak parents. A lot of us, because I actually discussed this with a lot of my friends, both psychiatric and other professional colleagues, and a lot of us said that we actually get angry when our parents are unwell. We shout at them for being unwell. We'd probably be more sympathetic to other people who are unwell rather than our parents. Because it makes us feel insecure. It makes us feel that this is not what it should be. It makes us feel that this is not how life is supposed to be there, how life is supposed to be held. The parent is supposed to look after the child. The child is not supposed to look after the parent. Now, anyway, bottom line is, as we grow, as the parents grow older, as they become more dependent, we are going to see a lot of this stuff happening. And I'm sure a lot of us who are also registered, because I see a lot of very familiar names, and I know what they're going through. We have to face up to the fact that our parents or other people, may not even be a parent, maybe a spouse, maybe somebody else in our lives, maybe a child, unfortunately, might be having a problem because of which that person becomes somebody who needs chronic care, long-time care. And they may not be a light at the end of the tunnel. There may be a degenerative disorder, which is, we know, not going to get better. There may be something for which the only solution is a transplant. There may be something for which the only solution is lifetime medical help, some kind of treatment, so that you're controlled and not cured. And all of these are not easy. So if we are looking at the various situations, sometimes we start wondering, is it actually better to have a mental disorder, which is a long-time thing, or a physical disorder, which is a long-time thing? And both have their own pluses and minuses. If you're looking at something, for example, like uh, Parkinson's. Now, you know, as people get older and older and start living longer and longer lives, we'll end up having more cancers, we'll end up having more degenerative disorders, which we never were used to in the past. And now we're seeing this huge thing of Parkinson's. And I wonder if you really know what Parkinson's is all about or what dementia is all about. At one time, we would pop it by the time we were 50, never really saw dementia. I remember when I was a young medical student, my dad asked me to see one of his colleagues. And that colleague was a computer engineer at that time. And he must have been about 65 or 70. And I was this young, strapping 35-year-old who just, I mean, 30-year-old who just about finished his postgrad. And I was filled with life. And yes, I had to do good for the population. And my dad had told me that he has been diagnosed with dementia by somebody else, but they want you to have a look because they know that you're my son. And I went over and I had this lovely man. And I remember having seen him when I was much younger. He used to come over home and he was full of life. And he sat there with this silly, inane grin on his face. And I said, "Hello, uncle, how are you?" And he was like, "I'm fine, beta, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fine, but I want to ask you a few questions." And he said, "Of course." So I said, "Uncle, how much is 1 + 1?" And he smiled at me and he says, "I don't remember." And I said, "What letter comes after B?" And he smiled at me and he says, "Beta, I don't remember." His wife was sitting next to me and she burst into tears. It's very tough to deal with things like that. We're seeing a lot of it now. Dementia is becoming very common. Sometimes we look at it in terms of perspectives of what are the behaviors I'm looking for. Okay, so this was a memory loss. There are certain kinds of cognitive imbalances where in addition to the memory loss, you also land up having behavioral problems. You become aggressive. You might land up having visual hallucinations. You might become cold and not give a damn for other people's feelings. And suddenly a person who was this lovely, warm, interactive person becomes a caricature of himself, and you're wondering why, what is the purpose of life? We get into this situation so often. And it's almost horrible to say, but I mean, you're going to live like this for another 20 years, 30 years. And you wonder, is there a point to all of this? And there must be a point to all of this. But if you're a caregiver and you're living with somebody like that, somebody who you've been very close to, somebody who you've been very fond of, it's terrible on you. It's a terrible, terrible feeling that you experience. It's a terrible feeling of helplessness. And then you pass yourself through a whole bunch of feelings. It all depends on, first of all, whether you're the only caregiver or there are other people to share your burden. And this is what we tell everybody. Please ask for help. Please get people to help you. This is going to be a long-term thing and you're not Superman, you're not Superwoman. Point number 2, it depends on how many hours you're going to give that person. It depends on whether you're also doing something else. And this is where people who are by and large at home,
especially women. Hello? Hello? Nabia, can you hear me?
I hear you, Bhavna.
Okay.
I think.
Dr. Kersey's connection.
Yeah.
Okay. He'll come back. I'm going to take the opportunity right now to let all those who are on our call know that we will be having the session. We will just let Dr. Kersey log back in. And as he logs back in, we would encourage you to use the chat box to drop in your questions, concerns, inputs, etc. And as you're doing that, I'm also going to launch a poll to just get a sense of who all is there in the room right now. So you might relate with different roles. Please post what is the role that you are most in touch with. Anish, can you help me launch the poll, please? Anish, are you online? Anish, are you online? Can you help me launch the poll, please?
It's already done.
Launched, Bhavna.
Oh, okay, sorry, I could not see it. That's
No, as the host, you might not see it.
yeah. So I would request the participants who are online to put in your inputs. And while you are putting your inputs, just a reminder that you can, log in your questions, your concerns that you would want us to take, which we will take with Dr. Kersey during the conversation, but preferably towards the end. And we will also have an interactive section where we will you can directly ask Dr. Kersey questions about situations that you may need more clarity on. While we are recording this session, we would like you to know that none of this is being live streamed anywhere. And we will not be using the section in terms of the interactions anywhere else. So this is your private space. Please feel free to ask your questions. That's the potential for this session rather than a recording, that you have an opportunity to ask questions and interact. Nabia, can I request you to please just check in on Dr. Kersey if he's having any trouble? Looks like it's one of those days when particularly challenged. I hope everybody has participated in the poll.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Jyoti Maheshwari here, Bhavna. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. I mean, since there is certain issue, can I converse with you?
Sure, please let me know. What would you like?
Yeah, it's really a great concept and really appreciate. I'm a psychiatrist myself, so I was interested for some of my patients and their family members.
Yes.
Just wanted to know a few more details. Like, do you have some kind of membership or something for these caregivers?
Yes. So at this point in time, since we are a young organization, we just have support groups that people can join. But
Okay.
for specific services that are individual, there is a membership as well as it is service based.
Okay. So service based as in they have to give in some service to the organization. Is it so?
No, if you avail of a service.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah.
It's
Okay. Nice talking to you. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm happy to give you a little more information, Dr. Jyoti. I will send you the details over email or our website.
That would be nice. Thank you.
Good to have you back, Doc.
I'm terribly sorry. I don't know what happened. It just crashed for about, 8 minutes or so. So I'm back. I'm terribly sorry about this, and I'm glad you could intervene. Okay. So like I was saying, I think I was at the time where we were saying that, if you're dealing with a person who's, sometimes you wonder whether it's better to have a physical problem or a psychiatric problem. I was talking about the dementias, and you're having a person who's suddenly a different caricature from the person that you used to be. And, I gave you the little vignette about my father's colleague. It was such a horrible situation, and you start wondering what is the purpose of it all. His wife got into a crying fit, but she was just looking after him. And when I followed up over the next 8 or 10 years, she was constantly looking after him. Now, at that time, one never really thought that the caregiver would also need help. Today, we know that the caregiver would certainly need help. Today, we know that, if a situation like this came into my realm of work again, I would certainly insist that that caregiver also either took the help of a support group or did something that would enable her to cope better with all the trauma that she was going through. So you get into this whole thing of sometimes is it better for a person really to have just an issue where you have a memory lapse, or whether it's better not to have that memory lapse, but to get very aggressive. There are certain kinds of neuropsychiatric disorders or cognitive disorders where aggression comes in, where disinhibition comes in, where suddenly a person who's been a nice, gentle, thorough gentleman gets disinhibited and starts having sexual acting out issues. It's very frightening. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know how to cope. And then you start the medication and you do whatever else you can. And that brings in another bunch of issues. Because sometimes you start thinking that the doctors are not doing enough. Sometimes you start thinking that it's financially extremely expensive and you don't know how you're going to cope. Because let's face it, it can get very, very expensive. To give you a simple example, supposing a person becomes incontinent. So you're going to use Pampers. Pampers are by no means cheap. And if you're going to use 2 or 3 Pampers a day and you're going to use it over the next 10 years, it is not easy. So we look into all of these things, and sometimes we don't really pay attention to these other incidental things that happen. What are the other things that we look for? They also are known at times to, if you're constantly looking after a person, you get into what is called a burnout. And this burnout can incorporate a whole bunch of things. In a burnout, you can have, you can have your own depressive episodes coming out, your own anxiety coming out, which are the psychosocial issues that we are talking about. The burnout can include behavioral issues. I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I don't have enough time to give everybody else. My mom or my dad are constantly needing my expertise. I don't know what to do. I don't remember the last holiday I had gone for. I might take recourse to a little more of cigarettes, and I might take recourse to a little more alcohol, because that is something that helps me to cope. And sometimes it causes health issues even in the caregiver. Lots and lots of caregivers complain of headaches, their own blood pressures go up, their own, if they have diabetes, very often their sugar levels go out of sync. It becomes a major, major, major issue. Sometimes we don't realize, but even doctors can get into this on a regular basis. I knew in one of the hospitals where I was working, one of the senior most oncologists, cancer surgeons, used to tell me that she had reached a stage after about 40 or 50, she was very senior, after about 40 or 50 years of being in the department, that when she knew that no other intervention could take place, when she knew that the person just had nothing, that she could offer nothing to the person with the cancer, she stopped seeing that patient and she sent her juniors to see the patient. She said, I know it sounds horrible and I know that the patient would want for me to see, but I can't cope with it, Cassie. She said, I'll end up getting nightmares. I can't sleep. And especially if the patient is a child, which is horrendous. Yeah. She just couldn't cope. So she would send her juniors to look after the kid. And towards the end, she dissociated. This is the only way that she could cope. Looking at it from the side of the patient was not happy. Looking at it from the side of the doctor, that was the only way she could cope. Who's right? Who's wrong? Don't doctors also have the right to look after their own mental well-being? Don't doctors have the right to look after their own, to look after themselves too? Sometimes the patient doesn't really look at it in that perspective. There are rights and wrongs to both, but this is again a perspective that a lot of us don't have. It is taken for granted that the doctor should always be available, and sometimes that's very difficult. We get into this gender thing. A lot of people used to tell me that it's basically the lady of the house who does most of the caregiving. And yes, that might be true. I mean, it's almost taken, it used to be almost taken that the man would go out and have to earn the money. And if the lady was at home, or even if the lady was working, it was expected that she would give up her job and sit at home. Over the last 5 or 7 years, I found a different scenario happening. I found a lot of men getting into the caregiver's role. I found a lot of ladies continuing with their jobs, especially if they were being paid very well. And I think that's wonderful. I think now, just like we don't talk about mothering and fathering anymore, we talk about parenting. I think now when we are talking about being a caregiver, it should not be related to male and female. It should just be related to, being a person who is there, being a person who looks after somebody, being a person who wants to give of himself or herself. And I think that's wonderful. So the perspective has changed from basically only being a lady who's expected to take care of this compassionate caregiving thing to anybody who's okay doing it. But we still see ladies, I think, getting more affected, being maybe softer, just by being a lady. I think maybe you're a little more compassionate and you are a little more patient very often than maybe the man is. That is changing, and I have seen some fantastic male caregivers as well. But the trend is still towards the lady being expected to look after people. What are the other things in general that I'd like to talk about? One of the things that we have to realize also that very often there's a reduction in, there's a restriction in the routine that maybe the caregiver would like to give, would like to live. So for example, if I'm constantly looking after somebody who needs my help, my routine gets restricted. And if my routine gets restricted, I might be wanting to go out with my friends. I might be wanting once in a while to go out on a holiday. If all of that is just not possible because I'm needed to such an extent. Over a period of time, it's not surprising that two things happen. Number one, I get a little bitter. I get a little non-caring. I might even get angry. And number two, there's a kind of what we call depersonalization, which happens. I move away from allowing myself to feel. So I'll end up being a little cold. It's like somebody falls and falls on a banana skin. I'd normally go and rush and pick him up. But if I'm depersonalized, I look at him and say, be careful. What are you doing? You stupid idiot. There's a kind of a distinction or a difference in the way that we react to things just because we're kind of burning out, just because we can't take it anymore. And there are also families where two people, both the parents, for example, might have a problem. So I've had a situation, I've had so many situations where people come and tell me that maybe the dad has dementia and the mom has a fracture, or the dad has dementia and the mom has an intractable diabetes, which was not looked after and then needed to have an amputation of the leg. So now she's helpless and the person has to look after both people. It's terrible. It's terrible for the people who've undergone the disorder and the disease and the operation. But sometimes, or very often, we actually forget that the caregiver lives a horrible life as well. So we need to get the support going. We need to do things. We need to be aware of the fact that it's okay for us even to look after the caregiver and not only focus on the person who has the issue.
Speaking from a lay person's point of view, doctor, I found that there are many people who would rather be seen as, like caregiving is my duty, my dharma, and therefore it is something that I don't need to take help for, and that I will be a weaker person if I went to a psychiatrist.
Okay. So let me just comment on this. Yeah. So let me comment on this. India is supposed to be a fairly spiritual country. Sometimes you look around at what is happening and you wonder. But anyway, we're supposed to be very spiritual. And I do believe that if you have a strong religious bent, I do believe that being religious or being spiritual or thinking of things as, karma related and things like that gives you some support. It gives you a certain amount of succor. It makes you a little reassured. It's like, scientific or non-scientific as a doctor, at times one looks up and says, God, please help. It gives you that support that very often you need at that time. So when you're saying that, it's part of my spirituality and I'm supposed to do this and I'm a religious person and it's my dharma and I have to look after that, all of that is great. But I've always said that, of course, do all of that, but do not set yourself up for two things. Do not become a martyr and, just lie down and say, walk all over me. And always, always, always ask for as much help and support as you can, because this is something that is then going to help you. So then if this is something that's going to help you, take access to the help that is available. This whole thing of why should I go to a psychiatrist or a social worker, I think it's changing now. I mean, all of us have huge OPDs, so obviously more and more people are coming to us. But maybe in this perspective, we still have people who are a little diffident and say, how can I go and tell the doctor that I'm feeling angry with my dad because he needs my care all the time because he can't get up? I mean, yes, it might sound crass to say it, but believe you me, the psychiatrist or the mental health professional will not think you're being crass. He will think that you're being sensible and you're doing whatever you can to ensure that the help that you're going to give your dad endures for a long time period, and you're not going to burn out after 2 months and say, oh, I can't cope with it anymore, let me put him into a hospital and not look at him again, which also sometimes happens. So we've got to get into a situation where we ask for help and where we get out of this thing of, am I a weak person? What will people say if they know that I'm asking for help for my dad? Of course, I can look after him. I've got everything. I'm financially well off. I'm a strong person. Why should I ask for help? All of that is nonsense. You've got to ask for help. Most of these things last for a long time period. You have a chronic lung problem. You have a chronic kidney problem. You might have a cancer. You might have a psychiatric problem, which is going to last forever. All of these things, you got to need the help. You got to take all the help that you get. So ask for the help that you need.
Absolutely. And I think that very often the well-wishers of caregivers have a big role to play.
Yeah.
So I would like for, and I think there are a couple of questions which I will ask you, but I think that, how do you encourage caregivers? So one can always say that you need to ask for help.
Yeah.
But there can still be, we know that, we know it, that we need help and that I can ask for it, but still something comes in the way. What is it that well-wishers can do, and how, what would you say? So for example, a lot of people might turn around and say, listen, I think I need mental well-being. So why don't I just go talk to my friends rather than why should I go to a psychiatrist? My God, a psychiatrist might prescribe medication and I don't want to have medication.
Yeah. So there are a lot of myths associated with prescribing, and there are lots of myths associated with psychiatrists, and there are lots of myths associated with medication. Every person who comes to a psychiatrist does not get medication. A lot of patients, maybe about 30% don't. But if you do need medication, it is stupid for you not to take the medication. If the psychiatrist, after a proper evaluation, feels that you're kind of burning out, feels that you're not eating enough, sleeping enough, you're getting very sad, you're crying, you're losing control, you're getting very irritated, you yourself are feeling very down and depressed and scared, and you're getting into obsessive things, the psychiatrist might suggest that you need some medication, and he's going to give you the medication that he thinks you need after a lot of evaluation. And it's going to make you feel better by and large. If it doesn't make you feel better, go back to the psychiatrist and he'll change it or alter it or change the timings or do whatever else you have to do. This whole thing also is, why should I go and why should I take medication? It's like saying, supposing you have a fractured hand and I tell you to do yoga, you think I'm a dumb guy. If you have a broken leg and I say, go to a physiotherapist, that's again dumb. So just like that, everything that is based with anxiety or depression or a psychotic thing cannot be dealt with by counseling, cannot be dealt with by doing yoga or pranayama or meditation. Sometimes you need a medical intervention as well. And provided you've gone to somebody who's qualified, and provided you don't look at Dr. Google all the time, then you'll be in a safe situation and hopefully do well with the kind of medication that is given to you, which will enable you to support yourself and to cope better with the situation that you're in. sometimes the situation is actually worse because it's a kind of a voluntary situation. You know, you can always leave when you don't want to. You can always stop being the caregiver. And a lot of us then get into this guilty thing. And I have a lot of people who have been caregivers for a while, and then they've said, we can't cope with it anymore. I'm putting him into a home, or I'm getting a 24-hour caretaker, and I will do everything, but I cannot look after the person. And that's fine. It's okay. We are human beings as well. Yes, there may be an element of selfishness, but if you have to choose between being selfish and preserving your sanity, it's okay to preserve your sanity. It's okay to come across as being selfish. Now, I don't mean that you shouldn't look after the person at all, which also happens. And that is certainly not something that I'm advocating. So let's not leave this seminar saying Dr. Chowda has said, dump your person. I'm not suggesting that in the least, but I am saying that if after a period of time you get into a situation where it's very difficult for you to cope, then it's okay to seek help, and it's okay for you to kind of detach for a while and maybe again come back and detach and come back and so on.
So we have a question here, which is that, very often that, one as a, palliative care counselor, you have patients with conditions that are like dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. And what that means is that, a big part of the intervention is counseling. Is there something else that can be done both with the patient as well as the families beyond counseling?
Yes. There are medications that can be given to look after the behavioral aspects of the dementia. There are medicines which are also given which attempt to prevent further deterioration of the cerebral atrophy which occurs during the dementia process. If related to the dementia, so for example, if you have something called frontotemporal dementia, there may be a lot of aggression, there may be a lot of behavioral issues. Go to us. I mean, I have a lot of patients like that, and we put them on medication to reduce the aggression. You don't want a person beating up, say, a servant. You don't want a person being abusive and hitting and shouting and screaming. Right. So you give the person medication to reduce it, to control it. So this is one of the things that can be done in addition to the counseling. You look at things in terms of psychosocial support. Right. There are times when the caregiver should also join a social group. I mean, a support group which deals with the particular problem. So we have support groups for Alzheimer's. We have support groups for chronic psychiatric illnesses. We have support groups for depression. We have support groups for OCD. We have support groups for ALS. We have a whole bunch, we have a whole bunch of neurological things for which there are support groups. And my recommendation to everybody is try to find one. And if you can't go regularly, fair enough, but attend as often as you can. Sometimes just learning that other people are in a similar situation and figuring out the ways they have coped makes you feel less alone and empowers you to do things which might be different from what you've been doing so far, or which might only reinforce what you've been doing, so then you know that you've been on the right path.
Absolutely.
So counseling and a palliative care therapist is fantastic. I have the greatest respect for them. They're doing fantastic work. But I mean, even in my hospitals, we have palliative care people and they work with us. So we work on a psychiatric basis as well. They do a lot of counseling. They're doing a lot of end stage work. It's tough. What does the caregiver do? What does the palliative therapist do? The palliative therapist and the caregiver and the doctor need to debrief and to talk to other people about their own feelings. It's not easy for me to be with a person, even if he's not related to me, and I'm seeing him deteriorate before my eyes, and I'm seeing the effect it's having on the family. I mean, I'll end up sometimes being like God. I'll end up doing things which might cause effects on the child and on the family. I feel like crying with the family. My heart is breaking with the family, and so on and so forth. And I'm not superhuman. So I have to get into a situation where I can talk with my friends. I have to get into a situation where I can talk with my psychiatric people. I have to get into a situation where I can tell people who understand, the psychiatrists themselves, about my feelings. So they help me also cope with my own feelings, which get so badly affected by the kind of work I'm doing. We must remember, psychiatrists have the highest suicide rates in all the professions of medical health. Why? Because we're listening to such stuff all the time. we need help as well. And so also for counselors, so also for every caregiver who's looking after people on a long-term basis. And knowing in a sense that there's very little recovery that might actually happen.
I think the idea of death and dying has become so difficult in our times. We have wanted to, prolong life. We have wanted to push death away rather than accept it as a part of, human existence. That, the conversations about death and dying have reduced. There is huge grief associated with it. And we have also probably forgotten how to deal with grief. So I wanted to bring up a couple of other things. For example, there might be a bunch of things that actually happen for caregivers after the caregiving journey. So, you can kind of hold yourself together for a very long time. A very dear friend of mine actually had a huge physical impact just after she finished the caregiving journey.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Very often during the process of looking after somebody, your adrenaline kicks in and you have to do whatever you have to do, and you're all empowered and you're all strong and you're doing whatever has to be done, and you're doing it for a long time. Suddenly there's a void. And when that void occurs, if you spend 7 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours looking after somebody and you really don't know what to do in that void because, your own life has been on hold, and sometimes it's been on hold for years. And suddenly you have a lot of time and you've cut yourself off from your friends. You've cut yourself off maybe from other people who would be willing to come and meet with you because you just had no time and you didn't want to take their help.
Yeah.
Suddenly everything has changed and you don't know what to do with your time. At such a given time, it's not surprising that we go into either a very severe grief reaction or a very delayed bereavement reaction, or we'll end up getting into situations like you say, where there are aches and pains all over, where you never would have paid attention to it in the past, or you can't sleep, or you're constantly thinking of that person and having a conversation with that person, and you can smell the person and you can see the person. It's a tough call. You need help at that time on occasion. And over there, if you go to a good counselor and, you work your way through your grief, by and large, that's all it takes. In some situations, you might need medication, but that is not as common as, just the support and the therapy that a good grief counselor and a palliative therapist might be able to help you with at that time, so that you also accept that your emotions are normal, your emotions are, because you're not a piece of wood or a piece of stone, you're a human being and you're supposed to feel what you feel.
I think the whole thing around grief is also interesting, because I think there is also, there's an underestimation of grief, because there's an expectation that, you will move on fast. People will, ask questions like, was that person okay? As if, if the person was crying, that's wrong. And, is the person taking it strongly? Is the person moving on? As if those were better things than grieving.
Yeah. There's this whole thing also that you've done your duty, now move on with your life. And it's not so easy. Yes, over a period of time, hopefully the positive experiences will remain for a longer time period. Oh, let me come to the positive experience. I never mentioned that at all. We've only spoken about the negative experiences of caregiving, but we do have positive ones. You get a feeling of self-affirmation. You have a feeling of affection and care and love for the person who you're caring for. And if you've had a good relationship with that person and that person blesses you every day because of what you're doing, it makes you feel very good, makes you feel nurtured and, makes you feel very good. So it does give you a positive feeling as well. But over a period of time, after the person is no longer there, an extended grief reaction or an extended bereavement reaction can last for years. So sometimes people say, what happened 6 months ago? Get over it. No, sometimes it does. You can't get over it.
Yeah.
It might last for years. It might last. You might find yourself tearing up after 2 years. Yeah. You might suddenly get a thought. You might get a smell which reminds you of that person, and you might start thinking about that person. You might have suddenly a dish which reminds you of the way that person used to cook that dish.
Yeah.
All of these things actually point to the fact that we are human beings and it's okay for us to have feelings. Yes, I look at it like this. Supposing today I have a very expensive vase and I love that vase and I break that vase or that vase breaks. I'm going to cry and I'm going to rant and I'm going to rave and I'm going to say, oh my God, this shouldn't have happened. 6 months later, I will still remember that person and I will still feel bad, but hopefully the emotion associated with it will be a little less. 2 years after that, it's not I'm going to forget. I will still remember that person. But over a period of time, it will reach a stage where I will hopefully only remember that, yes, this was a lovely thing that was there. This was a lovely person who was there. I had the honor and the privilege of looking after that person. I still care for that person, but I move on. So this moving on thing, which is one of the most important things in dealing with grief and in dealing with bereavement, is what we should be looking for. And it can take time. Some person might, in a sense, cope better and not get very emotional after 2 or 3 months. Some person might take 2 or 3 years. Some person might take longer. None of them is wrong.
Yeah. I think being judgmental about this or, critical about this is what, or people fear how might I be seen if I am like that.
True.
So I'm going to pick up a question that has been asked, which is, let me first state the question in the words it has been written, and then I would want to say something to it as well. How do we deal with extreme paranoia and victim complex, and why the closest of kin is the #1 enemy in an otherwise sound mind and body patient?
Okay, I really don't know how to answer this because this is a very generalized thing. So I would really think...
I was reminded of a case where very often the caregiver is duty bound to look after the patient. It is not really, out of love and a very deep relationship. So there is the trust between the two is probably not great. And, because the trust is not great, maybe the patient doesn't trust the caregiver and feels that, they are being compromised. But the patient and the caregiver are in it together. So when there is no trust, what can well-wishers do? What can doctors do?
Every person is an individual in their own right. So once again, it's very difficult for me to generalize. What I would only suggest is that if you find it's absolutely impossible, and if you find that there's a feeling of paranoia climbing in, if you feel that it's getting out of hand and it's affecting you to such an extent, seek professional help. Because rather than just give you a generalized answer to something that I'm not really very clear about myself, I would suggest that you go and seek professional help, either a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and figure out what can be done either to reduce the paranoia or to start feeling less bitter about being duty bound and looking after somebody who you may not really even like very much, so that then you become less affected by what is happening.
Also, I think professional help comes not just for individuals. You could take professional help as a family unit or as...
Absolutely. And that's a very good point you brought up. I should have said that very often when we are dealing with the caregiver, we are dealing with the caregiver's family as well, because it's very unlikely that the caregiver can exist as a unitary person in his or her own right. He or she is going to react to everybody else. He or she is going to also affect the other people in the family who might not be the primary caregiver. So for example, if a lady is looking after her mother, the lady's kids might get affected by the fact that that lady is spending so much of time with the mother. Right. The lady, that is a grandmother, the lady's kids might then start resenting the grandmother, passing obnoxious comments about the grandmother. And all of that has to be dealt with. We also have to see that the total family has to be looked after, not only the caregiver. So that's a very good point. Yes.
Yeah, and I think sometimes children remain invisible in the whole equation. You kind of assume that children don't know what's going on, but they have a fairly decent idea.
They do.
I have another question, that there is a lot of societal pressure, especially in villages. How can you think of taking a day off or attending a family function when your child is so sick?
Ah, yeah.
How do
So,
you help mothers in such situations?
well, the only way that we can help mothers is by kind of empowering the mother to help themselves.
Yes.
And, at least in India, everybody has an opinion and everybody knows everything about everything. So everybody is a psychiatrist, everybody is a caregiver, everybody knows what you're supposed to do at that time. And they have an opinion. And unfortunately, they are not very diffident about voicing that opinion. So my suggestion to everybody and those who are listening in is, you have to do what you have to do. And it's very unlikely that people, shall we not even say unlikely, it is never going to be that that person who's giving you the advice is ever going to be in your situation. So you do what you have to do, which is best for yourself, and the hell with the rest. Yes, it's difficult at times to do it, but that is the only way out. Otherwise, you're going to land up trying to please somebody and trying not to look stupid in front of somebody and, following what X, Y, and Z say. And you're going to have a breakdown, you're going to have a problem, and that doesn't make sense at all. Because we are looking at something that is long term by and large. We're not looking at something that's going to happen in 10 days or 15 days, because then this seminar is really not meant for them. We're talking of long term caregivers.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a great point that has been pointed out, which is that a part of the whole trust and the ambiguity around care and illness, etc., is that extended family very often, are well-meaning, out of care,
Sure.
give a lot of unsolicited advice.
But, one of the things also that's known to help when you're making interventions is, shall we say, focusing on hope and positivity rather than the negative part that is there.
Right.
So, focus on the fact that even though the person is incontinent, he's still cracking jokes.
Right.
Focus on the fact that even though he has tremendous pain in his legs and he cannot even get up from the bed, he's still, enjoying a drink or something. It may not be a loud one, but I mean, look at it in that perspective.
Yeah.
If somehow the caregiver can also focus on the positives, and that is where we intervene sometimes. We tell them to not only look at the negatives, which are the 100, there may be 100 negatives and 5 positives, but if you start focusing on the positives a little bit more, very often it helps this entire process and it makes you feel more supported.
Absolutely. No, I think I would like to bring in that whole point around, sharing your caregiving journeys. So when we talk to people who have finished their caregiving journeys and they look back on their journeys and they share their stories, very often they look back and say, you know what, I should have rather just focused on the beautiful parts, or, I remember these memories, and rather than regrets or rather than resentments. And hearing the stories of other experienced caregivers can be very liberating. I have another interesting question that can family members be their own support group?
Of course they can, but sometimes they are not. Sometimes family members are the worst people to be with. Like I said before, everybody has their own point of view. Then it becomes, I'm older than you are. I have more experience than you. You shut up, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they are fantastic. I have had caregivers where the whole family has chipped in beautifully. And they've been so supportive to each other. And I've had families where there's almost been a divorce because of this caregiving thing. So it's an individual variation. But of course, the possibility is there. The possibility will probably be more if they also seek the help of a therapist who will be in a position to help, maybe lay down some boundaries that have to be followed, etc., etc. And what I think also has to happen is, sometimes we get into this thing of, I'm so busy anyway, who the hell has the time to go and seek help from a therapist or a psychiatrist? Yes. And my answer to that would be, find the time. Because what might come about and what should come about when you've gone once or twice or thrice or 4 times is possible alternative methods of dealing with the situation, which might actually be beneficial, cause less anguish to the caregivers, help the entire environment at the house, and so on and so forth. So yes, it might take a little bit of your time to go and seek help, and you might think it's not worth it, but by and large it is.
I agree with you, and I think that was one other question, which is like, where's the time?
Yeah.
Like I think it also comes from a place where you're saying actually that I'm not important. The illness and the patient is more important. So if you are deprioritizing yourself, then you will not find the time. But if you say that my health is as important, nobody's saying that you make it, you become selfish about it. But if it is as important as anything else, then
Yes.
there is another question that from a palliative care point of view, sometimes offering hope can be counterintuitive because hope can be misunderstood.
True. Now, there's a whole bunch of issues relating to that. I think in America, in the Western countries, especially if you're dealing with cancers, one can be a little blunt. So you'll end up just saying things very upfront and saying things in a very cold and professional fashion. Maybe in India, we'll end up being a little softer. Maybe in India, we'll end up being a little more gentle. Maybe in India, we are a little, we don't directly say things that sometimes should be said. I mean, so often I've had people coming up to me and saying, oh, my mother is 75 years old. Don't tell her that she's not going to live for more than 3 months. It's not going to help anyone. And fair enough. We don't necessarily have to, be very upfront and very blunt and things like that. But given the fact that, given in answer to your question, yes, at times it could be misconstrued, and the person then might feel a feeling of being let down when finally she comes to know that there is an issue and that the person is having a problem which is not really going to get better, even though everybody around her is like jumping around and saying, you're getting better, getting better. So it's again an individual variation. We have to say or do whatever we feel is right or correct or appropriate for that particular situation. Once again, it is impossible to generalize. Given all of that, it would still be a good idea to be as truthful as possible so that misconstruing whatever the reality is as less as can be. I think Bhavna has now got off the internet. We are having great fun with the internet today. So let me see if I can. Oh, you've come back?
I'm back.
You're back. Okay, good.
I may have lost the questions, so I may.
Okay, so I will answer I have the questions in front of me. There's one question which says, Indian society being what it is, it would be very helpful if the attending physician herself recommends consulting a psychiatrist. And I would agree with that. Coming from the physician who's looking after the physical health, if that person suggests a counselor or a psychiatrist, I think that would be terrific. It would also probably be more likely to be taken by the family. I would agree with that. Any special remarks related to the COVID situation? 2-3 people have asked that. So take the usual precautions, look after yourself, do the normal social distancing, especially if the person is immunocompromised, be very, very careful about who he comes in contact with. Wear a mask all the time, keep washing your hands. Also ensure that the person concerned wears a mask as far as possible and stays, has some social distancing if it's possible. If there is paranoia and if there is negativity associated and anxiety associated with the COVID stuff, and the person is getting very anxious or getting very depressed related to it, or even having signs and symptoms or getting obsessive about it, either get a counselor to look at the person, or at times a psychiatrist might be needed to give medication to prevent this anxiety and depression and OCD from spiraling out of control. So certainly seek the help of a mental health professional, and you might need medication for the symptoms associated with the anxiety and depression and the paranoia associated with the COVID.
Doc, on the COVID, I think there is also one is, of course, the anxiety and paranoia or anticipation, etc. But however, there's also the hard reality of many people actually losing their loved ones in very, very tragic circumstances and not being able to say goodbyes, and that having a significant implication on people. So from a psychological point of view, dealing with anticipation as well as the actual happening, what are your inputs for that?
Well, if it's not happening in your family and if it's happening with other people, then you're hearing about it or seeing it on television. And my strong recommendation to people is watch as little news as you can. Honestly and truly, it's not going to help you to know the stats associated with COVID infestation. I mean, how does it help you to know that you're not getting an ICU bed or that you're not getting a ventilator or that somebody is not being dealt with properly or that this or that is happening? 4 months ago when this whole thing started, I think everybody was watching television the whole day almost. Today, I think a lot of people don't even put the TV on, which might actually be the right thing to do, because very often just watching the news and the stuff about the COVID over and over and over again actually causes more harm than good. Given all of that, if it's happening in your own family and you just can't cope with the fact that somebody you know has been affected so badly, then get into a situation where you seek the help of a mental health professional. You might need medication, you might need other stuff. You might just need a catharsis to talk about your own feelings, and you need support during that time. Once again, depending on the individual, you will be dealt with individually, either psychologically or psychiatrically, and that benefit will hopefully come in to enable you to cope better with whatever is happening. Bhavna's back again? Okay, good.
Like a bad penny.
Okay.
What about maintaining, caring for our brain in the case of day-to-day life? Most of the ALS, dementia, etc., are all defects happening to our brain. So I think this is about in anticipate. So as we are growing old, to live longer, what can we do
to keep ourselves as mobile as we can? First of all, eat properly, sleep properly, try not to smoke, don't take drugs, have as little alcohol as possible, do exercise regularly, keep yourself as mentally agile as you can, do Sudoku, do puzzles. One of the things that's known to help actually is change the, if you're used, for example, to brushing your teeth using your toothbrush on the right hand, try brushing your teeth using the toothbrush on the left hand, and you'll see how difficult it is, and so on. So try to do other things to stimulate your brain activity. If there is a genetic component to it, and if many persons in your family have had the same kind of problem, go to a neurologist or a geneticist and find out what can be done to prevent further things, either anticipatory or when the symptoms first start, so that they don't reach the florid symptoms that cause so much of a problem. So things like that. But eventually we have to realize that we can only do as much as we can do. So some amount of acceptance needs to come in as well.
So I think, yes, so some kind of a spiritual leaning, as well as, somebody else mentioned to me that, being connected socially in a manner to volunteer and give back to society, can be a very powerful way to stay purposeful and meaningful, and can also.
And I would really reinforce that. I have always believed that one way that in which we can feel good is to give of ourselves to people, and maybe not to give us so much that it hurts, but to give and to give and to give as much as is possible given our own circumstances and conditions. And we will always find, and this is very philosophical and spiritual or whatever, but we'll always find that we get the benefits of that. So for everybody, try to do as much good as you can.
No, absolutely. So I'm going to just take a minute and read some of the questions that may have come to us before the session. So just give me a second. Okay.
Bhavna, do you want me to ask a few of them? If you
Yes,
want.
please. Please do. Please do.
All right. So, Dr. Keshav, one of the questions is that as a family caregiver, how do you suggest that one deals with their own depression while taking care of somebody who is clinically depressed themselves? So the care receiver is also clinically depressed, and
So I think we've kind
How
of
does-
mentioned that right in the beginning, that you need to
Yeah.
seek the help for yourself. That was, I think, the first question that Bhavna had come out with, where I had said that sometimes, especially if there's a genetic tendency, it's not only the behavioral
Yeah.
and the other stuff that we see, but we also land up having an actual psychiatric illness associated with, doing the caregiving. So provided you know that this is happening, provided you know that it's okay for yourself to seek the help, then you try to get to a good psychiatrist and figure out what can be done to prevent the symptoms of the depression or the anxiety or whatever else it is from overwhelming you and making you feel worse and making you actually incapacitated to being a caregiver. So you have to look after yourself as a caregiver in order to be a caregiver, which is why it's necessary for us to take care of ourselves. So for the family, then they should seek the help of the psychiatrist.
Thank you. There was another question here. Is that are there any specific programs that you're aware of which can help caregivers de-stress better?
Well, frankly, no. What we do suggest is learn, relaxation techniques. If you can, get into support groups. Support groups are supposed to be one of the most helpful things. So depending on the situation, if you can get into a support group and work with people who are having similar situations, in a similar situation, very often it either reinforces that what you're doing is good, or it makes you aware of other things that are happening, which you might be then able to incorporate with your own family or whoever is the patient that you're dealing with. So that is one of the things that I would suggest. I'm not aware if there anything specific for caregivers, excepting what you guys are doing, which I think is very, very beneficial as well.
We find very often.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Bhavna.
I think Bhavna's gone again. Yeah, we've lost her again. Yeah.
All right. And I think that's probably a conversation we will be hounding you on separately as well.
Sure.
I'm just giving you the advance warning of that. I think you already answered this question partly for sure, which is basically how can one decide if there's a need for professional intervention and when self-care is just not doing enough? Anything specific that people should look out for?
No, that's a very good question. I think what we need to do is to look at the person's reactions as compared to the past. So if the person suddenly finds that he or she is not eating well, sleeping well, is having dissatisfaction, is constantly irritable, is crying too much or getting very angry, or sometimes just screaming and screeching and feeling this burnt out feeling, in comparison to what it was some time ago, then I think one needs to seek help. If your pre-morbid personality, that is before all of this happened, has always been the same, then maybe it's just part of your personality type. That doesn't mean that that also cannot be benefited. I mean, that means even then you can go seek and help. But certainly if you find that things have changed drastically or are in the process of changing drastically, and that everybody around you is telling you that you're losing it in a sense, then you certainly need to seek help.
Thanks for that. There's another question which is fairly broad, but I'll just read it out verbatim. How does one overcome grief that seems to be persisting for a very long period of time?
Okay. Now, again, this is very difficult to, it's a very general question. Because like I said right from the beginning, grief and bereavement reactions can persist for a very long time period, and they're not considered to be abnormal. Now, they're considered to be abnormal only if you just can't get beyond the grief. If after 2 years, every day you're breaking down, or every week you're breaking down, or you're constantly just talking about that person, or that person's place has been made into like a shrine, then there's a problem there, and then you need help. Then you need help both psychologically or psychiatrically, and then you need to seek the help of somebody and maybe even get onto medication. Otherwise, if it's the normal bereavement reaction, then whether it takes 3 months or 6 months or 2 years should not really be something that you need to bother about too much.
Right. So basically, there will be periods of time in any given year or any given 6 months where one will remember the stuff.
Absolutely.
Probably not be.
Yeah. And like we had spoken once in between before, we have to remember the good as much as possible and not pay too much of attention on the bad. So remember the good times when the person was happy and cheerful and laughing and joking, and not too much of the bad time when the person was in bed all the time or crying or in great pain or wasting away or whatever else happens.
Thank you for that. The next question is, I think, fairly commonplace, but interesting still. It says that one of our participants, I hope he or she has been able to make the meeting as well, but it has sent across the question that balancing my personal life and the different roles that I'm expected to play, along with providing care to a parent, is very overwhelming and more often than not, frustrating. What you suggest?
Sorry, I'm losing the last bit, but I figure you're saying, what do I do in this scenario? Okay. This is very commonplace. Yes, we have to live our own lives as well as look after whoever we are looking after, whether it's a parent or somebody else. So what we need to do is to take cognizance of the fact that it is not selfish to also have some me time. It is not selfish to ask for help so that you get some time off. It is not selfish if you reach the end of your tether and you cannot cope, then the person might need to be put into a home, might need to be put into some assisted living situation. You feel bad about it, but if that's the only way that you can cope, then that's the only way that you can cope. Like I said once before, I certainly do not advocate that right in the beginning you say, oh, I can't cope, and put the person away. But if you've tried and you just find that it's just too much for you and that you are cracking up or your family is breaking up, then in a sense, we have to be cruel to be kind, and we have to ensure that as far as possible, we are okay, our family is okay, and the caregiver is looked after by somebody who might need to be paid for the services rather than by us, because the person who's paid for the services might actually provide better service rather than us when we are angry and depressed and bitter and irritated and we don't do everything that we are supposed to do. So it's a complicated situation, and over here very often the use of a therapist or a doctor or even a physician or a very close friend who understands the pathos behind what you're going through might actually benefit you adequately enough so that you cope with making a decision which is difficult.
Absolutely. And as it says, I believe, above all, do no harm.
Above all, do no harm. And that includes to yourself.
Correct. Correct. So I'm tempted to mention that there are technology tools available to manage routine, allocate tasks to friends and family, etc., including Caregiver Sathi app.
Yes.
And there is a bunch of content there in terms of prioritizing and scheduling time for specific roles, and some tips and tools over there. So I would just encourage people to
everybody to get into that
from whatever work has been done.
Absolutely. Is Bhavna back?
Yes, I am.
Oh, she is. Okay.
And she's just being charming
quiet.
and quiet.
Okay.
Uh,
Anish, if you will allow me just 1 second, there was one point.
yes, please take over.
No, Dr. Kersey you were discussing with me and you were saying that it can be particularly challenging when the caregiver is also professionally qualified as a doctor. So would you like to say something to healthcare practitioners and healthcare workers who are actually seen as experts but may have a personal stake when they are also family caregivers?
Yeah. It's extremely difficult because at times you'd like to think that you can do more and more and more of what you are doing. And at such a time, it might actually be a good idea for you to seek the counsel of a friend of yours who you trust and who might be then in a comparatively non-biased way suggest to you what should happen. So we're probably going to end this now, and I'm going to again share something that happened with my mom. I started off with something that happened with my dad. I adored my mom. She was about 86 years old. She was a French teacher. She used to write poems in French. But by the time she was about 86, she fractured her leg. And then she fractured it again. After the second time, she could hardly walk. She also started having what we call macular degeneration. Her eyes started to have a problem, so she couldn't see very well. And somebody who was bright and jovial and happy and cheerful was not so bright and cheerful. And she would often tell me, Casey, whatever happens, please don't take me to the hospital. Please don't take me to the hospital. She was in a bad state one day, and she I was there, and there was a help giver there, and she came running, the person came running into my room and said, something's happened to mom. When I went there, she was complaining of severe headache, and I kind of figured out that something had happened in the brain. And then she went into a coma, and I called up my friend who was a physician and who was looking ICU specialist over there. And I told him I'm bringing her to the hospital. And now he's been with me for 15 years, and he loved my mom too. And he just said, Casey, just hold on a bit. I'm finishing with my patient and I'll call you back. And he called me up. He said, look, you've taken her thrice to the hospital. She's becoming more and more a vegetable. He said, Casey, however difficult it is, you know that she's never going to recover from this if she's already in a coma. Let her go. And I kind of freaked out and I said, what are you saying? And I listened. Then I called up my own family doctor. Now, my family doctor has seen me since I was a little kid in shorts. And I told her, and she said, Casey, just let mommy go. One of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. We kept her at home. She was surrounded by people who adored her. And after about 14 hours, she just went away peacefully. And throughout the time, while she was conscious, she said, Casey, no hospital, Casey, no hospital, Casey, no hospital. It's very tough to be clinically detached. And it's terrible when, in a sense, I figured maybe if I had taken her to the hospital, I would have kept her alive, but she would have been a vegetable. Did I really want a vegetable? No, I didn't. It was bad enough for her anyway. But I still, after so many years, sometimes question myself as to, in a sense, did I play God? And I've talked about this so often with so many of my colleagues, psychiatrists and non-psychiatrists, and everybody has said, you've done the right thing. And I would probably do the same thing again if they was in that situation. But it's terrible being a doctor at times. So we need help too. So for all of you medical people watching and all of you psychologists watching, you need to look after yourselves as well. And I don't think we can talk anymore after this.
I don't think it is required, but I have to say that, thank you for bringing your whole self into this session and sharing such deep personal stuff.
It's not been easy, yeah.
I can imagine. I can only imagine, but I can say that we have deep gratitude, and I can say that by doing what you have done, you have perhaps opened vistas and possibilities for a lot of people, some of us on this call and some of us beyond. So thank you. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for what you have done for us today in this session. thank you all, and my apologies for our very erratic network. I think it was a difficult topic, so the telecom could not cope with it. But thank you all for making the time to be here. Do give us your suggestions and feedback, and we would, Anish, can we launch the feedback poll so that people can give us their feedback? And stay tuned. Please connect with us either through our website or our social media handles so that we can bring you similar programs and other programs that might be useful. We are soon announcing a certification program for caregiver coaches as well. So watch the space. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kairsey.
Absolute pleasure. And for all those who are still on, seek help. It's okay. We are good chaps. Chalo, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kairsey. Lovely.
Pleasure.
God bless.
Thank you, dear. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.